All right, so today we're diving into this memoir piece you sent in about streetcars on St. Clair Avenue in Toronto.
Interesting choice.
Yeah, and it really is a deep dive. I mean, it's about transportation, obviously, but also this guy's like whole life growing up in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, right away you get the sense of him looking back on his childhood with a mix of nostalgia and maybe some disillusionment too.
Totally. Like he describes those streetcars in such vivid detail, the sounds, the smells, even the feeling of the city moving beneath him.
Those sensory details are so powerful, right? They really tap into how our memories are tied to specific places and times. Like even just hearing him describe the rumble of the wheels on the tracks, I felt like I was right there with him.
It's like you're transported back in time. And for him, those streetcar sounds are totally intertwined with his memories of De La Salle School, this strict Catholic school with uniforms and a huge emphasis on hockey.
Oh, wow. So we're talking like old school Catholic education here.
Yeah, like the Jesuit brothers were a constant presence. Sounds pretty intense.
It makes you think about the expectations placed on young people back then, especially in those traditional institutions like the church. You can sense this tension in his writing between wanting to rebel and feeling trapped by those expectations.
It's like he's struggling to find his place in this world that feels very rigid and controlled.
Right. And he actually makes this really interesting connection to mannequins. He talks about being fascinated by those frozen figures in store windows and how it related to feeling trapped by adult authority.
Huh. That's such a cool metaphor.
Yeah.
Like those mannequins represent this adult world that he sees as unchanging and unyielding.
It's a powerful image for sure. And then he brings up corporal punishment, which adds another layer to this whole idea of control and discipline.
Yeah, he talks about experiencing it not just at school, but at home and even at church, which is pretty shocking to think about now.
Absolutely. It really highlights how much parenting norms and societal attitudes have shifted over time. What was considered normal back then is completely unthinkable now.
And yet he also talks about feeling frustrated with his own son's behavior today. Like he thinks maybe the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction.
It's a common sentiment, right? Like we've moved away from those stricter forms of discipline, but now there's this question of have we gone too far towards leniency and permissiveness?
Right. It's like he's wrestling with this idea of finding the right balance between freedom and structure, both for himself and for his son.
It's a complex issue for sure, and it makes me wonder how much of his perspective is shaped by those experiences he had growing up in that stricter, more traditional environment.
For sure.
Mhm.
Like it seems like he's constantly comparing his past to the present, trying to make sense of how things have changed and what it all means. And that's what makes this memoir so fascinating. It's not just a personal reflection, it's also a commentary on societal shifts and how they impact our lives in ways we may not even realize.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where he goes with all of this. Because he also mentions finding escape and freedom in those streetcar journeys. Oh, interesting. So it's not all about feeling trapped. There are moments of liberation too.
Exactly. He describes those rides as his own personal space for contemplation and observation, like a way to process everything he was going through.
I can relate to that. I think a lot of us find solace in those moments of transit, whether it's on a train, a bus, or even just walking down the street. It's a chance to disconnect from the noise and just be present with our thoughts.
Totally. And for him, it seems like those streetcar journeys were especially significant because they offered a contrast to the strictness and structure of his everyday life.
So it's like those rides represented a kind of freedom, both physically and mentally, a chance to break away from the confines of school and home and just be himself.
I wonder if those journeys also played a role in shaping his view of the city itself. Like maybe they gave him a different perspective on Toronto, one that wasn't bound by the rules and expectations of his immediate surroundings.
That's a really interesting point because he talks about watching the city go by from his solitary perch on the streetcar. So maybe those rides allowed him to see the city as a place of possibility and exploration rather than just a backdrop for his daily routine.
And maybe that sense of possibility is what he's longing for now as he looks back on his past and sees how much things have changed.
It's like he's searching for that same feeling of wonder and freedom that he experienced as a kid riding those streetcars, but now he's navigating a different landscape, both literally and figuratively.
Okay, so we've talked about those streetcar journeys, his experiences at school, and his fascination with mannequins as a metaphor for feeling trapped.
Yeah.
What else jumps out at you from this first part of the memoir?
Well, he also mentions his dad switching from taking the streetcar to owning a car, which
Right.
I think is significant.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It feels like there's a deeper meaning there, right? Like it's not just about a change in transportation, but maybe a symbol of something bigger.
Exactly, because that shift from public to private transportation reflects a lot of the broader changes happening in society at that time. The rise of car culture, the decline of public transit in some areas, and this growing emphasis on individual freedom and mobility.
It's like that car represents a kind of liberation for his dad, a way to break free from the constraints of the streetcar schedule and carve out his own path.
And yet now the author himself talks about being disillusioned with public transit and preferring to drive even with all the traffic and hassle.
Which is kind of ironic, right? Like he's come full circle in a way. Now he's the one seeking that individual freedom that his dad found in the car.
It makes you wonder if that disillusionment is just about the practicalities of public transit or if it speaks to a deeper shift in his values and priorities.
Maybe it's a bit of both.
Okay.
Like maybe he's nostalgic for those simpler days when the streetcar was his gateway to adventure. But as an adult, he's also grappling with the realities of modern life and the convenience and control that a car offers.
It's a complex issue, for sure, and it raises a lot of questions about the trade-offs we make between individual freedom and collective responsibility, environmental sustainability, and personal convenience.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating tension between past and present freedom and constraint, public and private. And all of it is interwoven with these vivid descriptions of streetcars and the city itself.
It's a rich tapestry, for sure. And I'm really curious to see how he unpacks these themes further in the rest of the memoir, because he also hints at this idea of the streetcar line disappearing underground.
Oh yeah, I caught that too. It sounds like a pretty significant moment for him. Like it represents the loss of something more than just a mode of transportation.
It makes me think about how the physical landscape of a city can reflect deeper changes happening beneath the surface. Like the disappearance of those streetcar tracks could symbolize a shift in values, priorities, even a sense of connection to the past.
And maybe that's what he's ultimately grappling with in this piece. The feeling that something has been lost in the process of progress and modernization.
Yeah, it's a sense of nostalgia for a time and place that no longer exists, at least not in the same way.
It's like he's mourning the loss of a part of himself, a part that was deeply connected to those streetcars and the world they represented.
And maybe in trying to understand that loss, he's also trying to understand himself and his place in this ever-changing world.
Well, we definitely got a lot to unpack here, so let's dive into the next part of the memoir and see where this journey takes us.
I'm ready when you are. Buckle up, because I have a feeling this is going to get interesting.
Let's do it.
And it's not just about the streetcars disappearing underground either. He also talks about the people who ride the subway today, like comparing them to the folks who used to ride the streetcars.
Yeah, he uses this phrase, soul dead, to describe them. It's pretty harsh.
Yeah, it is. But I think it speaks to this idea of disconnection, like he sees these people as being isolated and detached from their surroundings, almost like they're just going through the motions.
And he contrasts that with his own memories of those endless days of the sun when he was a kid riding the streetcars. It's like he's saying that something has been lost in that transition from above ground to underground, from a more open and communal experience to one that's more enclosed and individualistic.
I think you're right on the money there. It's not just about the physical change in the mode of transportation.
Yeah.
It's about what that change represents, a shift in our relationship to the city and to each other.
So it's like those streetcar journeys were more than just a way to get around.
Well,
They were a way to connect with the city, to experience its energy and vibrancy, to feel like you were a part of something bigger than yourself.
and maybe that's what he's missing now, that sense of belonging, that sense of shared experience that he associates with those streetcar days.
It makes you wonder if part of that feeling comes from the fact that streetcars are inherently more public. You're sharing that space with other people. You're seeing the city unfold together.
Yeah,
It's a different kind of journey than being alone in your car.
absolutely. There's a sense of community that comes with public transportation. You're all in it together. You're sharing that experience, even if you don't know the people sitting next to you.
And I think that's something we've lost to some extent in our car-centric culture. We're so focused on individual convenience and efficiency that we've forgotten the value of those shared experiences.
It's interesting because even though he prefers to drive now, he still seems to recognize the importance of public transportation. He talks about how those streetcar journeys shaped his view of the city, how they gave him a sense of freedom and exploration.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It's like he's acknowledging that there's something special about those journeys, even if they're not always the most practical or efficient option.
I think it speaks to the power of nostalgia, the way our memories can shape our perceptions and values even years later.
Totally. Like maybe he's romanticizing those streetcar days a bit, but at the same time, there's a real sense of longing there, a yearning for a kind of connection that he feels is missing in his life now.
And it makes you wonder if that connection is something that we can recapture or if it's something that's been lost forever.
That's a tough question. And I don't think there's an easy answer, But I do think it's important to keep asking it, you know, to keep thinking about how our transportation choices shape our experiences in our communities.
I agree. Because ultimately, it's about more than just getting from point A to point B. It's about how we want to live in our cities, how we want to connect with each other, and what kind of future we want to create.
So maybe this memoir is less about streetcars and more about this search for connection, this yearning for a sense of belonging in a world that feels increasingly fragmented and isolating.
I think you're onto something there. It's like he's using those streetcar journeys as a metaphor for something bigger, a way to explore these deeper questions about who we are, where we belong, and how we make sense of the world around us.
And maybe that's something we can all relate to on some level, that desire to connect, to feel like we're a part of something meaningful.
Absolutely, because whether it's through public transportation or some other shared experience, I think we all crave that feeling of belonging, that sense that we're not alone in this journey.
Well, this conversation has definitely given me a lot to think about. And I'm curious to hear what our listeners had to say about it too. Have they experienced that same sense of connection through public transportation? Or do they feel like it's something that's been lost in our modern world?
I think it's a question worth exploring because it speaks to some really fundamental aspects of human experience, our need for connection, our relationship to our surroundings, and how those things shape our sense of self.
You've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface of these bigger questions.
That's the beauty of these conversations. They always lead to more questions than answers, but that's what keeps things interesting, right?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So let's keep the conversation going. It's amazing how this guy's story about streetcars can spark such a deep conversation about like life and cities and everything, right?
It is. It really shows you the power of personal stories. Like they can open up these whole worlds of meaning and make you think about things in a whole new way.
For sure. Like I'm sitting here thinking about my own city and how it's changed over time and what's been lost and gained along the way.
Totally. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from this memoir, this idea that progress isn't always linear. Sometimes we lose things that are valuable even as we're moving forward.
It's like he's wrestling with that tension between nostalgia and the need to adapt to a changing world. Like he longs for those simpler days of streetcars, but he also recognizes that cities need to evolve.
It's a balance, right? Like, how do we hold on to the things that matter from the past while also embracing the future?
It makes me think about how we approach transportation planning today. Are we prioritizing individual convenience over community connection? Are we sacrificing sustainability for speed and efficiency?
Those are tough questions, and I don't think there are any easy answers, but I do think it's important to be asking them, to be mindful of the choices we're making and how they're shaping our cities and our lives.
So maybe it's not about trying to recreate the past, but about learning from it, taking those lessons about connection and community and applying them to the challenges we face today.
I think that's a great way to put it. This deep dive has been about so much more than just streetcars. It's been about understanding how our cities and our lives are interconnected and how those connections shape our sense of who we are and where we belong.
It's given me a lot to think about, for sure. And I hope it's done the same for our listeners.
Me too.
Yeah.
Maybe the next time they're walking down the street or riding the bus, they'll take a moment to appreciate those small moments of connection, those shared experiences that make up the fabric of city life.
And maybe they'll even be inspired to think about how they can contribute to creating a more connected and sustainable future for their own communities.
That's what we hope for anyway,
Yes.
to spark those conversations and get people thinking about these issues in new and creative ways.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of streetcars memory and the ever-evolving landscape of our cities. It's been a real journey.
It has. And we appreciate you coming along for the ride.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep those wheels turning.